Thank you very much, and would like to start thanking the organization of Studium Generale for inviting me. It's my pleasure to share with you some of my experiences and research in artificial intelligence with you. The focus of my talk this evening would be on the role of uncertainty in artificial intelligence. So what kind of uncertainty are involved, how do we model them, and how do we use and cope with uncertainty? Before starting, I would emphasize that artificial intelligence is inherently an multidisciplinary science. It means that many sciences contribute to the development of artificial intelligence. So, for example, social sciences investigate human behavior, either in isolation or in a social setting. They would like to understand and model intelligent human behavior, how, for example, psychologists think about how memory works, how perception works, how we use natural language processing, natural language, etc. But economists and sociologists are also very much interested in understanding and modeling interaction between individuals in a society. And they provide also models and analysis that can be used to develop also artificial intelligence systems. I hope I can explain some of those from my research. It is not only social sciences, but also humanity that contributes to AI very much. Philosophers, in particular, analytic philosophers, epistemologists, logicians, linguists, they try to understand cognitive faculties of human being. Things like reasoning, creativity, things like learning, adaptation. And these investigation has led to conceptualization, models, norms, then structures that underlie this kind of human cognitive faculties. Very much very valuable input for artificial intelligence. It's not only humanity and social sciences that contribute to artificial intelligence, but also exact sciences, like biology. They start to understand how small animals like ants and fish and birds behave. They can construct and produce amazing complex behaviors, and understanding those behaviors can help us to develop artificial intelligence systems that do complex tasks. Tonight, I will give you a perspective from computer science point of view on artificial intelligence. So, from computer science, artificial intelligence is a science that would like to advance technology, computer technology, to automate tasks for which human intelligence and intervention are needed. So this is kind of very generic definition. It's also a never-ending story, right? So because as soon as we automate some tasks, then you get human interacting with those technology, resulting in another type of task that human interaction with intelligent system can perform, and then the level of the society enhance and we get into a different level. In this definition, you see that the notion of human intelligence reoccur. I would like to emphasize that from computer science perspective, at least, we are not so much trying to imitate the way human perform the task, right? So we would like to do those tasks, but not necessarily in the same way as humans do. So let me give an analogy. Birds have inspired us to fly from very long time ago. And we have tried to imitate the way the birds fly. We develop wings, we try to imitate the behavior by flapping the wings, but that was unsuccessful. Actually, success started when we stopped imitating the behavior and started to understand much more abstract mechanism behind flying, namely aerodynamics. And as soon as we understood those mechanisms, artificial mechanisms, we could design machines that could fly in a much more advanced way as any birds can do, right? So we could outperform basically the behavior of birds in all senses. We devise machines that's much larger, much speedy, much accurate, and much safer than birds do. So let me bring you to some of technologies that AI has realized up until now, and it's much in progress, and many technologies are developing, and the speed of development is amazing. So what you all know and everyday life you use is, of course, the navigation system in your car. It's standard tool in every modern car. And what these navigation systems do is basically planning. And planning was one of the first problems in artificial intelligence. Right? So you have a current state, and you have a desired state to be in, and you have some information about the possibilities, about your abilities, and then the planning problem is basically to sequence a number of actions that bring you from the current state to the desired state. That's planning. Right? So in a navigation system, they know where you are based on GPS information, and you basically give an indication about the address where you have to be in, and then it will generate a path or a road and guide you to the destination. And the way these systems work is not the same. They don't perform the task in the same way as humans do. They generate actually all possible paths, and they come also with some suggestions, and then some of modern systems consult you about choosing shortest paths or most quickest paths or most interesting paths. And then you can choose. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty involved in making a plan. For example, these systems assume that the road network that is inputted in those systems are correct. So you all know that sometimes you come to some places where the road is changed and then they get confused. This is a kind of uncertainty where these systems still cannot cope with it. Sometimes, you go to destiny following these suggestions, and then you get a traffic jam or accidents. You cannot reach your destiny, and these systems are not yet able to cope with those things. But I'm sure, and actually I don't dare to say, because these developments are going by days, maybe it is already realized that they can incorporate those kind of information and reroute automatically or in consultation with you. So other systems that you use every day is buying from internet. So like, for example, Amazon. You buy things, they know what you buy, and they make recommendation to you. How they do is basically taking a record of what you have bought, and then they analyze all the other customers that have bought the same products, right? So they basically find out specific taste of consumption behavior, right? And then they see who are basically who have the same taste as you, and they look at what they have bought already, right? And they say, okay, because these people have the same taste as you, and they bought this, and you didn't buy this yet, so we recommend this to you, okay? And in most cases, it works. Right? Unless you use Amazon only to buy products for your neighbors or for your brother, which doesn't share your taste, or for some colleagues that has a different taste. Right? So you buy those things, you become classified as having certain taste, and then they recommend you something that you might not like to buy. And these days, of course, the notion of explainability becomes more and more important in AI, so they should basically explain why do they make this particular recommendation. So in this case, for example, they say, because you have bought this, we recommend that you might also be interested in this product. Other technologies that you use on a daily basis is Google Translate, that translates one language expression to another one with a pretty good performance, not yet very well sensitive to poesy, poems and sarcastic sentences or those kind of pragmatic issues, the use of the language, but they work in some way. I know that people that they do not share the same language, they don't understand the same language, they got relationship through this Google Translate, they send email and translate through emails, and they are adapting themselves to the deficiency of Google Translate, so they can still communicate with each other. But of course, because these translations are not very well not performing very well, those relationships are also not quite stable. So. Another things that we know from AI is robotics, right? So in the production systems, robotic basically take over the jobs of human labors. They produce industrial artifacts like car, and yeah, so politicians are really concerned about this this income of robots because they are scared about job markets and unemployment and those kind of issues. So these are things that you know, but you're also knowing, you know that soon there will be self-driving cars. It's every day in the media. And what these self-driving cars do, basically, is combining all this kind of AI technology, from perception to sensing to reasoning to learning, adapting, and robotic things, basically, to control the car. Right? So combination of all these technology will result in a system that, such like a self-driving car, that can basically observe the dynamic and all kind of uncertainty from environment, make decisions, and perform action in those environments. So those technologies that I used before, they are pretty much in a kind of safeguarded environment with restricted conditions, and they operate in a very well-defined environment. Like, for example, these robots, they close off the whole environment where these robots operate to basically remove uncertainty and remove the dynamic of the environment such that they can predict the consequence of actions that they perform, the robots. But these cars, they will operate in uncertain world, right? So they cannot predict everything. They have uncertain information. They have incomplete information, and they have to deal with it. These autonomous cars will share space and environment, and they will interact with other autonomous systems. They will cooperate, they will compete with each other, like we individuals all the time doing. And at this port of Rotterdam, these autonomous cars are supposed to basically move, load, unload this container from the ships and doing their jobs. And nowadays, they follow these lines, so the environment is pretty much safeguarded, and information are put on the environment such that robots can navigate themselves, right? But soon, this autonomous car will not need this kind of guidance and restrictions, and they will also collaborate with each other. They will negotiate, they will exchange the containers and do the job together. So all these kind of AI systems that I show you have to deal with uncertainty, because they operate in uncertain worlds, right? So navigation system, Google Translation, and autonomous cars, they all have to operate in dynamic worlds with a lot of uncertain, incomplete information. for example, machine learning these days is very popular, but the performance of these kind of systems, machine learning algorithm, is very much depending on the quality of data, whether there is a bias in the data or not, whether the information is complete, sampled well, and so the performance is really depending on this kind of quality of data. And the question becomes, okay, there is this environment with a lot of uncertainty and many dynamic forces, and this intelligent system should deal with them, right? The question now is, how can they deal with this uncertainty? They have to basically make reasonable inferences with the information that they have, this uncertain information. So the question is, what are these reasonable inferences with incomplete or uncertain information, right? And what kind of uncertainty can we isolate, can we see? So I'm just saying some of those uncertainty that are involved in AI, and I'm sure there are much more type of uncertainty, but I just point to some of them. So what are reasonable inferences? Let's start with the whole concept of inferences. That is something that has been investigated by a human being from the beginning of the history. So Aristotle came with this pattern of reasoning, which he thought, okay, these are reasonable patterns of reasoning called syllogism. And things like, for example, all men are mortal. This is some information that you have. And you have also information that Socrates is a man. And based on these two pieces of information, you can infer new information, namely that Socrates is mortal. Okay. Now, based on this type of example, they generate more abstract rules that basically you can apply to all kinds of information. So, for example, if you have information that all birds are animal and a penguin is a bird, then you can infer by just substituting these values that a penguin is an animal. Right? So you can just basically apply these rules to existing knowledge to create more knowledge, to infer other things which are logically implied by information that you have. So these are, the assumptions here are basically about information that are confirmed, justified information, true information. And sometimes you have a bit kind of uncertainty in the information that you have. Like, for example, default assumptions. Like birds typically fly. Okay, so you don't say all birds fly because penguin is a bird but cannot fly. You say typically birds fly. Right? And then you create or you see a new species, either a synthetic species like Tweety, right? And then you create it and you say, okay, this is a bird, right? Then it is plausible to conclude, to infer that that species can fly. Okay, possibly can fly. So here the conclusion include also some certainty. You cannot with 100% certainty say that that new species can fly, but you infer that it possibly can fly. So that is basically when you get the uncertain information, you still can reason with it. Now, let's say concentrate on a different type of uncertainty, which is basically incompleteness of information. Sometimes you have a partial information. So take a setting where there is a house with 4 persons. Right? These 3 are 3 of the 4, and the 4th person is killed. Right? And the person who has the person or the persons who killed the 4th one is among these 3. And the only information that we have are those sentences, like 4 sentences. The one says at least one of these 3 people are guilty. And the second one says, not everyone is guilty. The 4th one says, if Sarah is guilty, then Jan is guilty too. And the 4th said, if Petra is not guilty, then Jan is also not guilty. So having this partial information, can you infer or conclude something interesting about who might be the murderer? Right? Jan and Petra. Okay, so let's examine the way we do it in computer science. We just list all possibilities, right? So there are 8 possibilities, right? Either the first row says that everyone is guilty. The last row says no one is guilty. And the other 6 rows, there are possible combinations. So the first sentence, at least one is guilty, exclude the last situation. So that cannot be the case. The second question exclude the first sentence, which says that everyone is guilty. And the third sentence is Sarah is guilty, right? Then Jan is guilty as well, exclude 2 sentences. And finally, the last sentence, if Petra is not guilty, right, then Jan is also not guilty, exclude 2 other sentences. We remain with 2 sentences, right, 2 rows. And in these rows, you see that Petra, right, in both situations, in both remaining situations, is a guilty person. Right? And you see also that Sarah, in both remaining cases, is not guilty. Right? And because, of course, of incomplete information, we cannot decide whether Jan is guilty or not. Right? So that is where logic and inferences can help us to reason with incomplete information, and we might get a very useful and sensible conclusion. In reality, however, I'm going to show a video. So I have. So in reality, we reason, we do inferences with uncertainty, and sometimes it leads into kind of fallacy, sometimes very dangerous fallacy. So I would like to share this video fragment, which you might remember from some years ago.
There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between Baghdad and some of these terrorist organizations.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not.
Several unknowns, and I'm just wondering if this is an unknown
I'm not going to
unknown.
say which it is.
Well, Mr. Secretary,
I'm right here. I'm right here.
So nobody understood why Donald Rumsfeld, the US Secretary of Defense, said these things. So it was a response to the question that there is no evidence showing that there is a link between Baghdad and a terroristic organization. And he came to suggesting that, okay, there might be something which we don't know, and we even don't know that we don't know those things, right? And this type of reasoning has led to invasion of Iraq with catastrophic conclusions. Okay, so let's proceed. In AI, we basically distinguish 2 modalities of information. Right? We usually use beliefs when we are speaking about information which we are not certain about, where the information is likely to be true, but we are not certain. Right? So that is why we use belief. Right? So if I say, I believe that there is a traffic jam during rush hours in Utrecht area, right? It means that it is likely the case that there is traffic during the rush hours in Utrecht neighborhood. So from belief, you cannot basically infer or conclude that the fact that you believe is true. You just say it's likely. So in logic, we have 2 rules which says that if you believe something, then you can infer that you believe that something. And if you don't believe something, then you still believe that you don't believe that something, right? So these are very simple, weak notion of rules that you can apply to infer new beliefs, okay? But you cannot infer from belief that some facts are true. Of course, belief is about likelihood, and probability is a way to measure the likelihood of certain facts or certain statements, right? So, for example, we say that the probability that there is a traffic jam at Utrecht area during rush hour is 80%, right? So there is a huge literature on possible interpretation of probability, what the probability means. So if we say the chance or the probability is 80%, what does it exactly mean, right? So there are frequentist approaches, there are Bayesian approaches, there are many different interpretations of probability. I'm not going into that, just showing you that there are these different conceptualizations which deal in a logical way or in a probabilistic way about uncertainty that we use also in our AI technologies. In contrast with belief, we have also a modality of information we call knowledge. We say that we know something when we have evidence or a way to justify that what we know is true, right? So if you say, I know that there is a traffic jam, it means that basically you claim that there is a jam is a true and is a justified fact, right? So, and what justifies a fact, what justifies the truth of a sentence, right, depends very much on the community and what is accepted or counts as a justification, right? So I'm not going into deep. But in logic, we have, for example, a rule that says that if you know something, you can infer that what you know is true, right? So if you want to use the word know, right, in the future, then you should basically be prepared to be asked to deliver the justification for the fact that you say you know. So most people say, I believe, and that is saying something about, okay, based on my knowledge and information, it is likely the case that. So there's another video. That's a kind of following up to what Rumsfeld said. So here is a TV presenter who basically noted that there is something wrong with this type of reasoning of Rumsfeld. So he invited many years later and confronting as follows. Oh.
But that leads me to your most famous saying, which is talking about uncertainty in the world. That there are known knowns, things we know, and tell me if I get this wrong, because I know this is your baby. There are known unknowns, things we know that we don't know. And there are also unknown unknowns.
They're the
that we
ones
don't
that
know.
get you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in this case, isn't the one that got us something that is there's a fourth option that no one ever talks about, which is the unknown knowns, which is the things that we know, and then we choose not to know them or not let other people know we know.
So there is an interesting side view on this observation, which I would like to say something about it, and that is what we call distributed knowledge. So we might know something together, and we don't know that we know that, right? So if, for example, I know some piece of information, you know some piece of information, if we put them together and by communicating them, then we might infer some interesting knowledge, right? But we don't share it for some reason, because we don't know, for example, that we have this kind of information. So these are cartoons about one person knows that if there's a concert in Amsterdam, then there should be traffic jam around Amsterdam, and the second one says there is a concert in Amsterdam, right? So they know they don't know about each other's belief or information, but if they put together, then they can conclude that there is a traffic jam around Amsterdam. This is called distributed knowledge. So the knowledge is distributed, and if we communicate, we can get it. So this has really a serious issue in artificial intelligence, which is typically illustrated by the general problems. The general problems or coordinated attack problems is the following. There are two generals, and they have sieged a city from both sides, and they can only conquer the city if they attack at the same time, right? If they don't attack at the same time, then they lose, right? So they have to coordinate. right? And they have to send messages to each other, but they have no telephone, so they have to send a soldier. But the only way to send this soldier is through the enemy areas, right? So that enemy can kill or capture this soldier and kill it. So it means that the channel, communication channel, is uncertain, right? So the first general sent a soldier to the second general, right? So he arrives at the second general, but the second general says, okay, but I cannot assume that the first general will attack because he doesn't know that I know, right? So go back and tell him that I know, right? But as soon as the soldier goes back against the same route, right, the second soldier gets uncertain about whether now the soldier is killed or not, right? So he cannot assume that the first general knows that the second general knows. And that is a kind of indefinite thing. So that is a crucial problem also in, for example, communication with satellites when we transmit data, right? So these different satellites, they don't know whether the information that exchanges has arrived or not. So there are many different protocols designed basically to find a way to know that, to basically deal with the uncertainty of communication channels. Information, and that's another video, transferring information and knowledge, communicating, can lead to very interesting and entertaining situations. So I would like to share this video with you. It's about the Friends of the series.
Yeah. Phoebe knows about us. Well, I didn't tell them.
Them? Who's them?
Phoebe and Joey.
Joey?
And Rachel. I would have told you, but they made me promise not to tell. Oh, man, I'm sorry. But hey, it's over now, right? Because you can tell them you know they know, and I can go back to knowing absolutely nothing.
Unless...
No, not unless. Look, this must end now.
Oh, man, they think they are so slick messing with us. But see, they don't know that we know that they know. So...
Ah, yes. The messers become the messies.
Joey, do they know that we know?
No.
Joey?
They know you know.
Oh, I knew it! Oh, I cannot believe those two. They thought that they could mess with us. They're trying to mess with us. They don't know that we know they know we know. And Joey, you can't say anything.
Couldn't if I wanted to.
So that's endless story about these things. A funny thing. So let's go back to our artificial intelligence systems. So as I said, autonomous cars is something that autonomous systems is something that's coming, and there are a lot of developments and research on that. And so how we computer scientists see this autonomous system is basically illustrated in this sketch. Is a model where there is an environment and there is this cycle called agent. This is basically a computer system that perceive the environment, sense the environment, and it processes the information it has and the information that it perceives from environment and decide what to do. Okay, and that is a kind of continuous thing. It is called sense, reason, act cycle, which basically model the way we behave in a sense of continuously sensing, deciding what to do, and performing those actions. So autonomous cars are not the only type of autonomous systems. This robotic dog is also one of these autonomous systems, and I would like to share you some type of behaviors that this autonomous system can show. But before that, I would like to emphasize that these systems, they have some knowledge, like, navigators, they have knowledge about road networks, they have beliefs, so these different confirmed knowledge, non-confirmed knowledge. They have preferences, objectives, where to go. Do you like to go to a nice road or a quick road? They have certain actions, information about the actions, what will those actions do. Actions might be non-deterministic, creating uncertainty about knowledge about what's going to happen if I perform this action, etc. So they have to have this information and they have to be able to reason about this information. But they also have to be aware about norms, like traffic norms, right? So, but also social norms, how other autonomous systems behave, how people behave. Social norms are very important. If you drive car, that you really have to be knowledgeable about how the community drives to basically coordinate your decisions. But also responsibility. That is a crucial issue these days. If a child jumps before this autonomous car has a decision either to kill the child or basically divert and injure possibly the people who are sitting in the car and damaging the car. So which decision do you take? This is a kind of moral issue. I'm not going into this issue. It's a very important one. There's a lot of investigation on this about responsibility. There are lots of paradoxes and dilemmas to be solved to this issue. I think the classic example is there is a rail and there is a train coming and you are at the switch, right? And if you don't do anything, the train goes through and there will be an accident and some passengers will be injured. But you can also change the switch, right? So diverting the train to a rail where there are people working on the railroad, right? So they might that might result injuring some of these people that work on the rail. And then you have to decide, what do you do, right? So there are different approaches, like utilitarian approaches and those things. Anyway, so this system should. But what is also very important, we are starting to realize, is the role of emotions, right? In human behavior, emotions regulate our behavior by just focusing our attention to what is important and relevant, right? So when we design autonomous system, we might need this kind of regulatory mechanism like emotion in designing system. So let's have a look at the video, the following video. It's this robotic dog. So this sounds scary, but actually what's going to do is there is a child kidnapped in the other room, and he's going to save the child, right? What is interesting, I think you might have different ideas about this. I think the interesting thing is that this robot dog tries to achieve its goal, and the goal is to be on the other side of the door, okay? And it's also very nice that he tries, even though there is someone who tries to prevent the dog to enter the door, he still tries and tries. That's something that you can appreciate. You can say, okay, that's a good thing, right? But suppose that the door is unlocked, right? So it it really doesn't get open, right? The dog will still try endlessly, right? Maybe indefinitely, until the energy, it's a waste of energy, until its energy is finished, right? So that type of behavior, right, which is not shown here, of course, right, is a kind of autistic behavior, right? This is some certain kind of unnatural, inefficient, ineffective type of behavior. And actually what is missing in those behavior is something that works with us, and that's called emotion. Emotion regulates our behavior. So how? I'm going to explain now. So as I said, emotion is considered as a kind of mechanism that regulates our behavior by changing the focus of our attention. So let me give an example. You are sitting at home doing some work and you want to finish it, and then a fire alarm goes on. Okay? So you might sit there and argue or reason that, okay, you almost finished, so you need just a couple of minutes to finish your work, and if you do it, then you can just go away or leave the house. But that really increases the chances that you get injured, right? And so the emotion, basically, what happens is as soon as this fire alarm goes on, you get fearful. Right? And the function of fear is that you forget that you have to do some homework, right? And that your focus of attention becomes of, I have to save myself, right? And if you have family, my family, okay? So this important role of emotion is very important and actually recently considered as complementary to rationality. So rationality without emotion would not be effective, would be something like a kind of not social autistic behavior, right? Persisting to do something, endlessly, even if you know that there is no possibility to achieve your goals. Okay, the model that is usually used to describe the working of emotion is as follows. So you have again this environment here, right? And this whole right part is this agent that perceive the environment, and based on the perception of the environment and its knowledge, right, it might come into a certain emotional state, and that emotional state will focus your attention. Okay? Now, one important thing that I would like to emphasize is emotion is different than feeling, right? Having cold, having hunger, having the butterfly in the stomach, these are feeling. These are not emotion. Emotion are cognitive state of mind, okay? And, but they are closely linked to these feelings, evolutionary, right? So evolution has basically made a direct link between this cognitive state, right? For example, that you believe that something is going to happen which is bad for you, right? Then your heart rate goes up. You start to become uneasy, right? And that particular mechanism, physiologic mechanism, direct your attention, right? That you can forget what you are doing and focus your attention to something which is important, right? If a lion jumps in front of you, you don't reason, you just escape, right? Try to fly. And that is what we call notion of coping. That's basically as soon as you get into emotional states, right, with people, goes through this physiological mechanism, right? With the computer, we can just have a direct link. If you have in a fearful situation, then you follow a different action selection mechanism, right? As Nico Freida put it, action readiness strategy. So some actions become more available than others, right? So the way the emotions are defined, I'm just rephrasing some of those, is, for example, distress or sadness is when you know, right, that your objectives cannot be achieved anymore, right? You become sad, right? But if you, remember, you know that your objective cannot be achieved anymore, so you are certain, right, that your objective cannot be achieved, you become sad. That is in contrast with the fear. You believe, right, that you might not be able to achieve your objective. You become fearful. Right? And these two different emotions have different, propose different strategies, different behavior to take. If you are sad, you leave your goal. You say, okay, I know I cannot achieve it anymore, right? And the emotion reaction to it is leave the goal. You don't need to achieve it anymore. But if you're fearful, it means that you probably think that it is likely that you cannot achieve it, so you try your best to ensure that you can achieve it. Right? So there's this difference between uncertainty and certainty, and how these basically, through this emotional mechanism, can direct or guide your behavior. And anger is, in this particular dog example, if you see that there is some entity outside, in this case a human being, right, that prevents you to achieve your objective, right, you get anger. Right? And anger basically might, for example, call for a strategy to revenge. Right? So if we get into, for example, this example, the robot dog knows that a man is accountable for reaching the desired position, and the robot gets angry because it cannot reach its desired position, and the strategy that it takes is eliminate the man. Right. So how much time do I have? So this is the last topic I'm going to explain. It's about another topic of research that I'm doing, and this is about norms. It's about the complexity that emerges from the interaction between individuals. Right? So we all know that if you are alone, right, then you can pretty much control the situation, and you can pretty much control what's going on and what's happening. But when you get into social community, then you are not alone, right? Then it's you start to interact, and the interaction brings a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what the other knows. You don't know what the other is going to do. Even if you agree with them to do something, they might deviate, right? So this problem with public transport and free rides issues. So these are issues, right? So in traffic, you see also that there are many cars. They share the same environment, they have to interact, and then some emergent complexity arises. Right? And that is actually some issue that appear everywhere, where individuals, either there are elements, bacteria, there are autonomous systems, there are human beings, when they start to interact, right, there is a kind of a structure that may emerge. Right? And this emergent complexity, it's very hard to predict. It's very hard to analyze. Which decision of individuals, right, has led to this kind of emergent property? And how can we steer this kind of emergent property? So in the terms of traffic, we would like to have a high throughput on the road. Right? And we might know that this traffic jam is caused because of these individual behaviors. Right? So some goes slow, some doesn't give right to the others, and the braking, the way people brake, start to brake, it causes this kind of jam. But we don't know exactly what. Right? And that is really a big issue in, I think, all branches of sciences. So we predict that in the future we will have these autonomous cars, and they will interact, and we might know, because there are autonomous cars, we might know concrete information about these individual cars, and we might also know what kind of emergent behavior they might cause, and we might basically be able to steer or control this kind of emergent property, like, for example, making sure that there is no jam when these autonomous cars are on the road. To say something about a more realistic scenario is these days what you know about financial systems, stock markets. So most financial institutions, banks, insurance company, they buy and sell shares based on software systems called algos, algorithmic traders. These algorithmic traders, they basically observe the stock market. They have a strategy to buy and sell. They have some information about the company. And it happens more and more on a regular basis that they started to sell together, all these kind of algos, they start to sell or to buy massively. right? And that introduces what is called a flash crash, right? So the stock markets, like Dow Jones, right, go into dip, right, in a fraction of minutes, right? But it's also repair itself, right? It recover itself again in a fraction of minutes. So these are kind of emergent property. Now, what is the cause of this kind of phenomena is the fact that these algos, they don't coordinate their behavior. They don't share their information. Of course, they don't share the strategy of buying and selling. That is how they earn money, right? But because they don't know and they don't coordinate, they don't exchange information, they can create catastrophic situation. Other application areas is a smart grid. So as you know, we all can consume and produce energy these days. Households produce energy, and these have to interact to buy and sell. Right? And if there is no coordination, if there is no regulation of these autonomous systems, right, might be undesirable situation that emerge, right? One way to understand this kind of complex mechanism, and here is another video, is by means of technologies that we develop in AI called agent-based simulation. Basically, what we do is creating a huge number of individual agents that behave in a certain way. We can program them, right? They have a certain strategy of action selection, they have certain information, they have certain preferences, and then we can just observe how they behave. And as you can see, a specific behavior that are implemented in these kind of individual cars result in a kind of traffic jam, right? And then we can just play with these different parameters, how they brake, which kind of speeds they go, to basically see if we can avoid creating traffic jam. So that's the kind of technology that we use basically to understand how local decisions have an impact on the global behavior of the system. This is some system that we have done in Utrecht. That's kind of agent-based simulation. The cars are norm-aware. They have preferences, right? So the preferences is basically that they would like to go to a certain destination. They would like to go with a certain speed, right? And they have some economic state. So they are rich or poor or middle class, this type of things, right? And then we can examine that, and they are aware. They can really reason about the traffic norms, right? We say, okay, at this junction, right, you have to have this speed, otherwise you get this amount of sanction, right? And they are sensitive to this sanction, right? And then we can see whether this traffic jam is created, and if so, we can just increase the sanction. Right? We can also pinpoint sanction to the economic welfare of particular cars, right? Because if they are rich and you can just impose €50 sanction, they are not sensible to it, right? So we know that this guy is rich and say, no, €1,000 if you want to increase your speed, right? So that's the kind of way that I think in Switzerland they also do with human behavior. So that is basically what we do to see how we can control these kind of emergent properties, structures, to get more certainty about what kind of properties the interaction of these systems can create. Very specific topics, just before finishing, is, so this is basically the basic schemas. So there is roads, and we monitor, and we basically intervene by means of sanctions or other means. But the point is that if you introduce certain norms, a norm set, and you enforce those norms, right, then it might be the case that the norms is not effective. So it's a silly norm, right? How can you learn that a certain norm is effective, right? So we need to learn, right, to see the enforcement of a certain norm, what is the impact on certain objective of the system, like, for example, higher throughputs, safety, less accident, and those kind of things. So we apply machine learning here to see what is the impact of enforcing certain norms, right? And then if we see that the norms are not effective, we start to revise norms. right? To revising norms in sense of we make the norm more stronger, or we alter norms, we just trying to change. And by these kind of dynamic that we introduce by changing norm, revising norms, we try to basically discover or learn how we can understand the complexity of interactions on a road. So to conclude, artificial intelligence is by definition a kind of science that has to do with uncertainty at all levels. Uncertainty about information they have, about the consequence of actions, uncertainty about causations, and all these kind of things. And multidisciplinary techniques are very much needed, like emotion norms, norm enforcement, to basically make the system able to deal with uncertainty. And of course, what we do is trying to apply AI techniques that can be explained. So if something they do, some decision they make, they can explain why they did this, right? And also make it a responsible AI, right? And responsible in the sense that they can be so if something happened, that you can trace back who was responsible. Biggest problem is if a number of autonomous cars get an accident, right? Find out whose responsibility was this accident, right? And how much contribution each individual autonomous car had in creating this accident. So these are issues that we are now working on. I thank you very much for your attention.